Imagine. Just imagine being on the subway in Paris on October 1st, 1962. Your destination is the Paris Opera House. And as you get off the train and arrive at the top of the metro stairway, you notice a newsstand. And your eye is captured by a big, bold headline on the European edition of the New York Herald Tribune. Riots at Ole Miss. 2 killed, over 300 injured. These riots happened because James Meredith, a black U.S. military veteran, had the temerity to enroll at the University of Mississippi. And just imagine your first reaction to seeing this headline. My first reaction was stunned distress. My first thought was, this is awful. This is really awful. But for me, this headline and the story behind the headline was even more poignant because I was a 20-year-old foreign exchange student from Kalamazoo College, a small, very white Baptist liberal arts college in southwestern Michigan. I was a young and naive college kid from a working class family from Madison, Illinois, an all-white rural village about 20 miles south of Chicago. But even more, this story was disturbing and fraught with anxiety because I was a very young foreign exchange student who was about to fly from Paris to enter Thur College, an all-black African university. In Sierra Leone, West Africa, a small nation on the southwest coast of West Africa. I was part of a group of 5 from K College, and we were scheduled to travel to Freetown in just a few days. So on the morning of October 5th, this young and naive, excited and scared group got on a plane at Charles de Gaulle International Airport in Paris and disembarked 7 hours later at a very different kind of international airport, Lungi International Airport, just south of Freetown, the large and bustling capital city of Sierra Leone, a third world country. We traveled from Lungi to downtown Freetown on a bus, passing numerous mud huts on the rural roads that we traveled on first, and finally entered into Freetown. And I was seated at the back of the bus, and my 4 Kalamazoo colleagues were in front of me in scattered separate seats, and after traveling not too many minutes in Freetown, through its congestion and its poverty, I looked at my friends, and it was clear from the look on their faces and the feeling in my heart that we were all stunned. All of us had volunteered to attend Thur College because we wanted to experience a very different culture in a very different part of the world. We did. But my first impression of this very different culture, my first impressions were overwhelming. What have I gotten myself into? Was screaming inside of my head. So we made our way from the center of Freetown up Mount Oriole to Thur Bay College and settled in. Now, when James Meredith had settled in at the University of Mississippi and started attending classes and eating in the University of Dining Hall, students would get up and leave. In the classroom, in the cafeteria, Mr. Meredith was constantly sitting alone, isolated. Admittedly, that was progress from being cursed and beaten. During our first days at Thur Bay College, we were a curiosity, but never were we treated as alien and despised curiosity. Just the opposite. During our first meals in the dining hall, students from Sierra Leone and Ghana, Nigeria and Gambia came to sit with us and made a special point to greet us and welcome us. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, we became just a regular part of the student body. Most of our relationships were really fine, a few not so fine. It's the way it was back at Kalamazoo. Life on the campus was common and often very pleasant. And our relationships with faculty and people in town, missionaries around the country, were simple and pleasant too. And the contrast made it that much more dramatic. In contrast to what had happened at the University of Mississippi, these common and good relationships became for me an experience of radical hospitality, an important value in the United Church of Christ, of course. And this simple hospitality transformed me and turned me toward a path that led me to ministry for Christ's sake. My experience at Thur Bay was a great gift. And I received this gift willingly and gladly. In the debt of gratitude, a debt that I have been repaying for 50 years. And one of the ways I've been repaying this debt is to work to build bridges. Could say a lot more. We'll close with two brief biographical notes. I went from Kalamazoo to attend seminary. My first seminary class was 1967, not 2006. And in the late spring of 1968, I was called as the associate minister at Westmoreland Congregational United Church of Christ, located on the far northwest corner of Washington, D.C. Now, you may recall that on April 4th in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And following Dr. King's assassination, riots erupted in a whole variety of cities, including Washington. Vast areas of our capital city were devastated. So like my arrival in Sierra Leone, my arrival in Washington was preceded by a great national tragedy, and my early ministry there was shaped by this terrible event. I was called to Westmoreland in part to work with a nonprofit housing corporation formed by my new congregation and Lincoln Congregational Temple United Church of Christ, an African-American congregation. And this housing corporation had been formed many months before Dr. King's tragic death. Lincoln Temple was located in the heart of the riot area, so a significant portion of its neighborhood had been devastated. And during my first year of ministry, a lot of my time was devoted to working with members of the Lincoln Westmoreland Housing Corporation, black and white together. Almost. I hope, we built all sorts of bridges as we built housing for low and moderate income families a few blocks from Lincoln Temple, and not that many blocks from the White House, as a matter of fact. And as a matter of fact, Lincoln Westmoreland Housing Corporation built and dedicated the first housing that was erected in a riot area in the entire United States in 1969. So my months at Florida Bay College turned me toward ministry and prepared me for a ministry of bridge building, beginning with my work with Lincoln Westmoreland Housing. David Isay, the founder of StoryCorps, has said, listening is an act of love. Really listening to each other's stories is one of the greatest gifts we can give to one another. Thank you for listening so attentively.
Good afternoon. What an honor to be here. My name is Doug, and I'm an alcoholic. Would those who care to help me get grounded by joining in the serenity prayer for those who know it? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thank you. So my first religion course was actually Christian ethics, taken at Morningside College in Sioux City, Iowa, back in 1981, I think it was, or 1980. And it was taught by Dr. Bruce Forbes, who some of you may know, is a Methodist minister. Taught at Morningside, may still be there for all I know. A little over 3 years before that course in ethics, I had hit bottom in terms of my drinking. I had fallen apart, my life was a mess, and I didn't know what to do about it, and I found a program that helped me get my life back. I was blessed enough to become a member of one of those funny programs that has 12 parts to it and meets in a lot of church basements. So that got me on a road to recovery. And getting sober and having a profound spiritual awakening after about 3 months were major turning points in my life, obviously. It is no exaggeration to say that without those transformational experiences and receiving the grace to respond to them, I'm sure I would not be on the planet today, let alone here speaking. So those awakenings proved to be the ground of my calling to ministry. And when it came time to apply to a seminary, I thought about places, and one place I was attracted to was Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. I thought a change of environment would be great, especially from Iowa, where I was living at the time, to California. That sounded rather attractive. And there was also a professor there, Robert McAfee Brown. In that same undergraduate work, I'd taken a special class in liberation theology, and we had read his book, Theology in a New Key. But there was this other place, this funny place with a long name, United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. And I did know that there was a person here named James B. Nelson. And in my undergraduate work, we had also read a book called Embodiment. And that book became a very important part of my own choice of United as a place that I would like to study. So I came here in probably would have been the spring of 1981 to be interviewed as a prospective student, and Jim was one of the people who interviewed me. Also, after I started classes that fall, I realized that Jim had been assigned to be my advisor. So our story began then of my life with Jim Nelson. There was an ethics class in part of my studies early on, and it was in that class that I can't remember what the theme for the day was, but there was something in there about fathers. And I think maybe we were talking about the ethics of perceiving God as Father, and for some of us that just wasn't going to work. And I had a very difficult relationship with my own dad. And at the break in that morning class, Jim had gone to his office and I followed him, and I fell apart and I just cried. And Jim held me in his arms. And he didn't say much of anything. He just held me and let me cry, and I got his nice sport jacket all snotty and everything. But he let that happen. And I realized much later, when I knew more of Jim's own story, that he also had that father wound. And he also recognized a grieving man and could make space for me. So he did that, and that was an amazing moment. Also, there came the time in my studies where there was a chance to take part in the Sexual Attitude Reassessment Seminar that was done through United Seminary in partnership with the University of Minnesota Program in Human Sexuality. And I was one of the students who was lucky enough to be selected to go into that course, and that was an amazing time. This picture that's on the screen now was a retreat that some of us did after the SAR experience. And some of us went up to Ark Retreat Center near Cambridge, Minnesota, and spent a weekend together just reflecting on what we'd learned. In that front row, the person on the right is Sister Rosie Jaguar, graduated the same class year that I did. I'm in the middle there, or the second person. Robin Scheel is next to me, and then Tim Perkins was there. Doug Gunderson's in the back row, and I apologize, but I don't remember who's in the center in the back row. Some of you may know her. And then Kathy Ann Beatty, who was another very important person in my life. So we were on this retreat together, just trying to absorb and process the experience of the SAR. Finally, I did graduate in 1984. And in that time, in those years too, I think the book Between Two Gardens came out. And then Intimate Connection was a few years after that. I think I've lost one of my pictures here. It doesn't matter. But I did finally graduate and had a launching of my process into ministry. Let me just see where we are here. After I graduated, I didn't have as much contact with Jim, just very occasionally. And what began to happen was a bit of distance between us until I got a call in April of 1993, and Willis Clare, who was also a friend, said, "I've got some news. Our dear Jim has gone into treatment, and he is starting to deal with his own issues around alcoholism." So that began a new level of relationship. I was shocked for him, but also very happy. I was shocked because I had no idea that he was struggling, and in those years when he produced some amazing books, I think he was dealing with his own way of trying to come to grips with his story and to figure out how to process this in the midst of his own struggles with addiction. Jim called me shortly after he was out of treatment, and this was another turning point. He said, "Doug, they tell me that I need a sponsor, and I know you've been in the program a long time. Would you be my sponsor?" And that threw me for a loop because I thought, wait. You might be an alcoholic and a drunk fresh out of treatment, but you're still my mentor. And I can't change hats or outfits in the middle of this relationship. And he said, "Well, could that be up to me?" He said, "Could we see how it works? And if you're comfortable, we'll go ahead." So we spent, until Jim died in this last fall, 2015, we maintained that relationship to one degree or another. So that was a turning point for me to realize that someone who I deeply loved and admired, we could have a different form of relationship as well. I had to give up the idea of worshiping him as an image for a mentor and realize this is another human being with struggles just like mine. It actually gave more meaning to me for some of the work that he'd done already, even in active alcoholism, and the work that he was coming to do. I'll just close with a couple of things here. So in 1996, my partner Stuart and I had our first wedding. This one was not legal, but it was done in the eyes of the church. And Jim was one of the officiants. So that's Jim at a backyard party, prenuptial party. Then that's Jim and Reverend Kathy Ann Beatty, who were going to co-celebrate at our wedding. And that's my husband and I, or husband-to-be and I, with Jim and Kathy Ann at the wedding ceremony itself, the exchange of vows, the happy couple, and this one, which is so dear to me, Jim, me and Stuart, and dear Willis Clare. So Stuart and I had the privilege to have then a more social relationship with Jim and Willis Clare. We went to Arizona a couple times to visit them. And after that, after 10 years of recovery, Jim decided he needed to write a book and get it out there about this intersection of recovery, of personal story, and of theology. There wasn't anything quite like that in the world. So what came into the world was Thirst. Stuart and I were blessed to be asked to be early readers of that manuscript, and chapter by chapter, we would read and then send the written comments back to Jim, and some of you in this room may also have been the first readers or the early readers, and I feel honored to have been part of that journey that as Jim created Thirst and brought that into the world. I think I'm going to need to skip ahead here. So Willis Clare died in 2009. 2 years later, I was finally ordained. I had a long discernment process. I graduated in 84 and then was ordained in 2011. But the Spirit is persistent. Norma Ray Burton, who's here, was one of my early ministers after I was out of seminary, and she kept saying, "Are you going to get ordained?" Yes, Norma, I did. So that's Jim. He was nice enough to preach at my ordination, and that may have been one of the last times he made it to the Twin Cities. By that time, he was already fairly frail and still, obviously, and of course, mourning the loss of Willis Clare in his life. So that's my partner Stuart and I as I'm getting robed, and that's me with my stoles after the words have been said and the blessings have been prayed. Stuart and me, and then Jim and I outside the church after the ceremony. So it's been a very long journey with dear Jim, and it continues. Jim, at the time of his death, was halfway through another manuscript, and it was dealing with, again, issues of recovery, theology, and personal story, and he was compiling a sort of dictionary in the style of maybe Frederick Buechner. And the family has passed that manuscript on to me. I don't know if we'll be able to bring it into the world. Getting a publisher nowadays is not easy. But I have the manuscript and I'm working on it and taking one word at a time and one concept at a time and trying to weave together personal story, turning points, and recovery. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Stacey Smith, and I'm excited to be here today to share with everyone a transformational moment in my life. The power story, if you were at lunch today, Dr. Holmes expressed about the griot. Well, the power story has played this important part in my life because it was stories that kept our family history alive. As tradition would have it, in the majority of the early African American families, we were not privileged to have had our family stories kept in nice files and public record bureaus. Therefore, the griot method of storytelling became how our story was passed down from generation to generation. And it was hearing these stories from my grandparents and my great-grandparents that I was able to understand life's transitional moments and to embrace them with all of my might. Although I had the great fortune to have many transformational moments during my life, I would like to share one of my most recent that I had last year in 2015 when I took a trip to India. In May of 2015, I, along with my daughter, at the time was 12, the senior bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and several other clergy members from our denomination traveled to our fastest growing church in our denomination, which is the AME Church of India. In 2007, the AME Church of India had 20 small family churches. And in 2015, when I was there, they had grown to over 150 churches with thousands of members. And today, in 2016, I just got reports because they just came back again, they have grown to over 200 churches, and they are counting. But what touched me was the conversion rate of the people to the AME Church of India. Why were they converting? I had to ask myself, why were they converting? And then as I began to talk to some of the people there, I found that when the people were told of our denomination's history, they were able to see themselves through the eyes of our founding father, Richard Allen. The similarities of a man being enslaved, marginalized, and denied to move about in his own society due to the color of his skin were remarkable and too hard for them to ignore. When they heard that those formerly enslaved acted to purchase their freedom to become entrepreneurs, business leaders, abolitionists, and church leaders in an independent Christian denomination, they were moved. The marginalized, dark-skinned Indians looked for respect and dignity in a nation that systematically overlooked their humanity in the very same way. And then, it was in that moment that I had my answer to why they were converting so quickly. I was able to experience a people who had nothing, and yet they showed me and the delegation that I went with honor and respect in ways that I had never expected. When we visited one of the newest churches, we were greeted with song and dance and cold drinks and cookies. Now in India, ice is a hard thing to come by. So then I knew at that very moment that it was an expense that this very small church of only 75 people that was only 3 months old had really bared a burden to present to us. After having a chance to view the church, we were invited to come outside. They sat us in chairs under a thatched roof where we were able to be in the shade. The members sat on the ground and invited us to participate in their devotion and singing. As they began to sing, I felt like John Wesley when he received salvation and he said, "My heart was strangely warmed." And so was my heart when I heard their singing. Although I didn't understand the language, I felt the power of the Holy Spirit moving. It was at that moment that I saw that God was able to be anywhere at any time. Even though I am a seasoned pastor, I had not experienced the love of God working outside of the familiar territory of the American churches. We often quote that God can be anywhere at any time, but rarely do we ever get a chance to see it for ourselves. After visiting with the newest church, we traveled to where the greatest work was being done, the leper colony. I really didn't know what to expect or what I might see. Upon arriving, we were met by the children of the leper colony, as you see here. They were filled with smiles and greetings and ushered us to where their parents and grandparents were in their very Sunday best. Once again, we were invited into a worship service where they were all gathered around, seated on the floor. While we were there, the singing began. I felt once again the Holy Spirit moving in the hearts of those who had lost so much physically but gained the world spiritually. I gained a new knowledge of what it means to suffer, and I felt somewhat guilty for being healthy and able-bodied. When we left the worship service, we were taken to another part of the leper colony. When we arrived, we were asked to assist our bishop with a ribbon-cutting ceremony on a new home and school for the leper children. It was at this time that I realized that these sweet little ones were not allowed to participate in basic age-appropriate functions like school. Although they currently do not exhibit signs of the disease, they were not allowed to be amongst those who do not. They cannot go to school or even have a job. Therefore, there is no hope for them to ever rise above their current station in life. They live a life segregated from the world and their peers. The AME Church of India has seen the need in these children and their families. Every week, food, clothing, and fresh water is brought into the colony to provide some of the basics that are needed to live. Outside of the church has built a home and a school for these children so that they can receive an education that they otherwise would never get and learn skills that will help them improve their community. The skills that are taught to the children because their parents and their grandparents have lost their hands, their feet, and that are the things that they need to assist them in building maybe a garden or producing clothes for them to wear. Also, skills are taught on how to improve hygiene and healthy living ideas for food, cooking, and eating. So in my time in India, it was quite the eye-opener. I realized how blessed I am to have grown up in the country that is the wealthiest nation in the world. To for once, and I say to for once, think of myself as a woman of color, to be privileged, to be a privileged class of people where my rights are intact and I am free to be a woman of whatever lifestyle I choose. However, this trip has given me a newfound love for those who suffer and are forever relegated to the margins of life. Those suffering on the margins of society epitomize what liberation theologians call God's crucified people, for they bear in a very real way the brunt of the sins of today's oppressive social and economic perspective on salvation. Thank you very much.
I thought that I had some control over planning when I would get married and when I would have children. But God had another plan for me. I wasn't married until I was 35, and at that time, we were ready to start a family. 4 kids is exactly what I wanted, so we had better get going. Well, after a year of no luck, I went on fertility medication, and the roller coaster that comes with that. Was pregnant, and at 15 weeks through the pregnancy, lost the baby. I was angry and questioning God about my timing. About another 8 months passed on fertility medication. I was pregnant again. Forgot to mention the first time sick for that entire 15 weeks with migraines and nausea. This pregnancy, 18 weeks of migraine and nausea, a few weeks of feeling good, and then the rest of the pregnancy on bed rest, which resulted in a lovely baby boy who is now an 11-year-old. Another year and a half went by of infertility, and another pregnancy happened, and at 14 weeks, lost that baby. Well, at this time, I was 39 and very frustrated and upset with God, and every time I'd see somebody in the grocery store giving their little kid a whack, I'd look up and think, really? She makes a better mom than I do? I was crabby and I didn't understand it, and I was really upset because my timing and my control on all of this was not working. My husband was not ready to start the adoption process, although at that point I was. And I said, okay, I'll give one more try on this fertility medication. Well, I ended up in the hospital for a week and having a hysterectomy due to fertility, the fertility fiasco, that's what I like to call it. After that, we started the adoption process, jumped right in. I was ready to go. I still had control. And then I realized I didn't have any control. I hadn't grieved this. I hadn't put my trust and faith in God. I turned everything over and said, no matter what, God, I know you have a plan. I know your timing is better than mine. And thought, I'm not going to get upset about anything that happens. I'm not going to worry about anything that happens. God will take care of it, and whatever is meant to be will be good. So we took some time to grieve, and then later went through the processes. We had looked at both Children's Home Society and another adoption agency. We went with Children's Home. We went through all of the testing and the people coming to our homes and got our profile together. And we're in the books. We prayed every single night with our son for our future baby and the godmother of our future baby. Meanwhile, there was a lovely young college student, a freshman at Augsburg, who came home and told her parents after her freshman year that she was expecting a baby. There's a blessing in this, she said to her dad, and her dad said, there is no blessing in this. Well, she was working with a different agency than we were, but I had mentioned to several of my friends, some of whom worked at Augsburg College, that we were in the adoption process. They mentioned our story to Amy, and she said, no, I'm working with a different agency. I'm going to stick with those families. She met a couple families, just didn't feel right, talked to her colleagues a little bit more about us. I met with her. Everything went very well. She was an amazing young lady, and she said, I'm meeting with 2 other families. So she met with 2 other families and still wasn't 100% sure. She said, could I meet your husband? And I told him, boy, you better bring it, because she loved me. Obviously, you can't screw this up. So she met him, and then she wanted to come over and meet our son. Well, he was 3 at the time, and for those of you who remember what it's like or know what it's like to have a 3-year-old in your house, they're naughty. She came over for dinner, and he was absolutely terrible. So bad. Anything that could have gone wrong at this dinner went wrong. And I kept saying, God, I really put all my trust in you, and I don't know, it's not going to be this young lady because this is a horrible night. So she's getting ready to leave. And as she's leaving, she sets a little envelope on the table. And I thought, oh, she's so thoughtful. She's saying, good luck. You're going to need it, because this little boy is a terror, and anybody who meets him isn't going to have anything. So my husband said, should we open it? And I'm thinking, oh, no, let the poor girl go. And she said, yes. And so we opened it, and it said, congratulations on your new baby girl. And this is a picture of us in the hospital. That night, Amy's parents were there, And her dad was the one who told us the story that he said, I told her there will never be a blessing in this. And he put his arms around us and said, there's a blessing in this. This is us together. This is kind of the story of Tilly and Griffin. They're now 7 and 11, and it's pretty much like this all the time. She's kind of the dominant one. And 2 weeks ago at graduation, they left my husband and ran outside and were the first ones to greet me when I walked through. So my story is a story of trust in God's timing. I now have a living reminder in my home. So every time I think that I can control something or that my timing is really good, I'm like, oh, I just have to look at Tilly and remember that, oh, that's right. She's here in my house as a reminder to me that God's timing is always better than mine. Thank you.